It's now my pleasure to introduce Natalie Hopkinson. Ms. Hopkinson holds a master's and a PhD in journalism from the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism, and she currently lectures in journalism at Georgetown University. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and on NPR and the BBC. She's currently a contributing editor to TheRoot.com, and her first book, which was co-authored with Natalie Moore, was called Deconstructing Tyrone, A New Look at Black Masculinity in the Hip-Hop Generation. Her new book, Go-Go Live, is based on a series of articles she wrote as a style reporter for the Washington Post, chronicling the unique musical culture of Washington, D.C. Through the history of go-go, a conga drum-infused, Caribbean-inspired form of music made popular first in the 1970s, Ms. Hopkinson explores the social history of Black Washington, D.C., including fashion, politics, dance moves, small business, and artists of all kinds. We're glad that you all could join us on this rainy afternoon, so please join me in welcoming Ms. Natalie Hopkinson.
Hey, thank you so much for coming out. It's kind of miserable outside, so I really appreciate it. And I guess I just wanted to start with giving a shout to Skip Gates. I started working with him when I was at The Root, and we met him, like I joined the staff of The Root about a week before it started. So The Root is an online magazine, which is a journal of culture and politics told from the African American experience. And I joined the staff about a week before it launched. And Skip came and visited us because he stopped into the office. It's based in Washington, D.C., and he was in town picking the next Black person to be on a stamp. And so we were all in the office like, whoa, this is, it's just kind of amazing to meet him in person. And, thanks to him and the Du Bois Center, I'm here talking about go-go. Harvard books and go-go music don't seem like much of a mix, but that's sort of the scope of Skip's world, and he's just got such a generosity of spirit, and so I really appreciate being here. So I actually would like to start by talking about the Chocolate City, and it's the other nickname for Washington, D.C. It's something because it's been a majority African American city since 1957. Really from 1957 to 2010. It was, it started off as the first major city that was majority Black, and, that's been its identity outside of the federal footprint. So, for those of you guys who are here, like if I could just get an idea of anybody from DC or okay, so you're a DC native? From Bethesda. Oh, okay. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Anybody else? Spend time in D.C., maybe?
I lived in D.C. for 3 years in Columbia Heights.
Oh, okay.
2008.
Oh, okay. All right.
I have some family down there. It's been down there for about 15 years or so. And I have some close friends living in Brooklyn.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Anybody else have any ties to D.C.?
My brother.
Oh, your brother lives. Okay, great. Well, I was new to DC too. I'm not a DC native, and so this was all new to me when I started covering the scene as a reporter for the Washington Post. So I wrote for the style section. My beat was Life Under 30, and so when I realized there was a huge scene in DC, that sort of turned that into the go-go beat. By that point, most of the go-go, and actually today. Go-go started in Washington, D.C. Chuck Brown was the creator of go-go music. Chuck Brown is a guitarist, and he played the blues, gospel, funk, jazz, pretty much every genre. And in 1976, he developed the go-go sound in collaboration with the audience at a club called the Maverick Room in Northeast Washington, D.C. And go-go is a lot of things, and so it can sound, some of it sounds sort of reggae, has reggae influence. Some of it sounds very much like funk. But what characterizes it is the beat and this conga beat. And that's how you know it's go-go. But even some of the new stuff sounds more like funk music. For my purposes, what was most significant about go-go is that it is, unlike many music, it's actually a collaboration between the audience and the band. And so it's not just the band on stage and you sit down and listen to it. The audience is actually making the music. So, you know, that's something that's very unique about go-go. It's a lot of shout-outs, a lot of call and response, a lot of you know, very high energy dance. And for me as an outsider coming in, it's something that it was just kind of amazing. The scene itself is amazing, and how much support it gets in the Washington, D.C. every single day, even to this day, in the metro area. You can have hundreds of people going to see the shows, spending $20 to $50, $60, $70 at the door in some cases, depending on what time of night you come in there. And to kind of have that reach and that depth, I just kept having questions about it. So I wrote some articles for the Post, and then it was the subject of my dissertation at the University of Maryland, College Park. So go-go is really, you know, just to give a quick overview of the kind of the breadth of the go-go economy, probably the thing that was most interesting to me was just this economy, because I'm like, how is this happening so long? You know, it started around the same time that hip-hop started in the mid-'70s. So, you know, what it is, it sort of felt, it kind of developed along parallel tracks with hip-hop. But whereas, you know, movements like reggae and hip hop, you know, they do like this. Go-go has sort of like done like this over the past, you know, 40 years. And it was sort of defies the laws of gravity, you know, like how does something just stay like this? And also just kind of trapped in this pocket of Washington, D.C. And so that's sort of the thing that really motivated me to keep looking at it. So, you know, it's become a multi-million-dollar industry. And what I found in my research and really thinking about it and connecting it to other musical forms, Black musical forms around the world, it's really sort of a metaphor for the Black urban experience, a very segregated experience. And so the book is, you know, I am a journalist, so the book is a book of essays, so they're really narratives, and, you know, there are lots of images that kind of tell this story. And so there are many layers that you can kind of look at it. So it's always interesting to see who, you know, whether you're a go-go person or whether you're somebody who's just being introduced to it. You know, on one level, I sort of look at it as a Black CNN. You know, it's what Chuck D called hip hop is a Black CNN. It's a way to tell the news in the Black community. And go-go sort of serves that purpose as well, because it is this negotiated experience between the audience and the band, but it's also a form of history, because, and what I did when I actually went to do my doctoral research, I transcribed certain key recordings, and what you can see is like the birth of the quote-unquote murder capital, all of those that the underground economy that emerged in the 1980s, all of that, you can hear that happen. You can sort of see that happen right there in the live music, in that live moment. So it's a form of history. It's a form of journalism, and it's also an economy. So, and then you can also look at it as a Pan-African cultural experience, and so. And that's kind of probably one of the most exciting things for me as an outsider looking in, was that when I first heard it, I really felt at home when I listened to it. And I sort of have a Caribbean background. I was born in Canada and came to DC for college in the early 90s. And so, you know, one of the frames that I look at go-go is as this, you know, call and response between musical traditions from West Africa back into the Caribbean, into America, back to West Africa. So, you know, that call and response, you can look at it on a number of levels. So I'll just read a section of that chapter called Call and Response. So this first quote is by Donnell Floyd, who's the lead talker of a band called Familiar Faces, and also one of the main founders of the Rare Essence, which is a seminal go-go band. And he said evolution from the past to the present. That's where this whole thing comes from, Africa. Drums was used to talk from tribe to tribe. It's call and response and that whole thing. So that's basically the foundation of go-go. On a visit to West Africa, I saw a lot of rhythmic congas and drums, a lot of call and response. They just don't call it go-go. Okay. It's one of those hot, sticky summer days in Washington when I, my mother, my 6-year-old daughter Maven, and my 9-year-old call-me-a-preteen son named Maverick head out to DC Carnival, the annual Caribbean parade and festival on Georgia Avenue. Maven waves a red, green, and yellow flag from my parents' native Guyana, while Maverick sports a bracelet with the tiny green, black, and yellow flag of my husband's parents' native Jamaica. My son sulks as we make our way down to the football field set up with food vendors and concert stages. He wanted to stay home, and it is hellishly hot. When I try to hold Maverick's hand to avoid being separated in the crowds, he pulls away from me, an early onset teenager. I ignore this as we cross Georgia Avenue near Howard University's campus, past the man of about 50 in a diaper hoisting a beer in one hand and an oxygen tank in another. We walk past the mud-splattered mass camps representing Sierra Leone and the ones representing Haiti. We pass the glittery peacock costumes, rows and rows of dancers. We take our seats before a mobile stage on Benjamin Banneker Academic High School field, which is filled with people waving umbrellas and colorful flags. A Jamaican MC in a white tank top and jeans, a t-shirt tied onto his head, paces the stage. I want one lady from Jamaica, another from Trinidad, another Caribbean country. I want them come up on the stage real quick, real quick. Real quick, he says. About a dozen women quickly scale the stage. A cheery soca harmony pipes out of the loudspeakers as the MC calls out to their countries or cities as they step right up. Kingston, Trinidad, Panama, Guyana, Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., Belize. One by one, the women take turns on center stage. The rumbling begins in their thighs and shoulders and moves like a precipitous earthquake. Rear ends jut out, sending ripples of cellulite into motion. One leg up, headstands, skinny hips shake on spin cycle. Butt flesh jiggles at the speed of popping corn. My 61-year-old mother, Serena, exchanges knowing looks with a woman sitting next to her who is about the same age. That's my grandson over there, she tells the woman, pointing toward Maverick. His jaw drops as a woman drops into a push-up position and then grinds her hips against the stage. The women both sigh. He'll be all right, the woman says in a West Indian lilt. Yeah, he'll be all right, my mom agrees in a sing-song voice. As we leave our seats to buy some food, my son clasps his hands on my shoulder, a peace offering. I'm glad I came, he says. I bet he was. When we get home, Maven reports her first trip to DC Carnival to our neighbor, a white gay emergency room doctor in his 30s. There was BUTT shaking, she says, her eyes growing big. Well, that's the best kind, our neighbor responds cheerily. If you tweak the soundtrack a little bit, the scene could easily happen on any given night on any go-go in Washington. You'll find the same frenzied movement, the same sweaty exuberance, the same overt sexuality commanded by a male gaze. You'll hear the same too loud sound system that grinds melodies into gravel. And you'd hear rhythm, lots of rhythm. When people ask me about go-go and how I could spend 10 years thinking and writing about it as a journalist and as an ethnographer, the best I can do is shrug. It's a Caribbean thing. I say, along with the black church, the Caribbean greatly influenced the go-go creator Chuck Brown. But the connection is more than a state of mind. When I heard my first live go-go broadcast on the radio during my freshman year at Howard University in 1994, my ears perked up in the same way it did when I first heard hip-hop MCs Melly Mel's show-stealing guest spot on Chaka Khan's I Feel For You at my Canadian elementary school. And when I first experienced go-go live, my body began moving unconsciously, just like it did on a childhood visit to Guyana when I first heard soca music with its staccato jump up and jump up rhythms. What was that music? Go-go, hip-hop, and soca, which is short for soul calypso, were born in the 1970s when each place was celebrating hard-earned political freedoms. The music expressed the exuberance of creating something new. In the West Indies, it was emancipation from European colonial rule. In New York, it was the civil rights movement and emancipation from Jim Crow. In DC, it was the birth of the Chocolate City. I was born in Canada in the mid-1970s and grew up in the United States, but the music always made me feel at home. It's like the words on a sign I discovered at one of the roti vendors at the DC Carnival. All we is one family. Black music is not just entertainment. It is a conversation across time and space. The same ways of speaking appear and reappear throughout the African diaspora throughout time, geography, and context. Through a transatlantic call and response among Africa, the Americas, and Europe, these musical traditions have survived centuries of trauma, Holocaust, slavery, and dislocation with remarkable resilience. As old forms die out, new combinations of the same components appear in their place. The riffs, rhythms, and repetition common to music throughout the African diaspora translate into social structures, according to the music scholar Ingrid Monson. In chocolate cities, they also translate into political structures, and that is what gives us a common identity. So while go-go in the chocolate city can be viewed as a strictly provincial experience, speaking to specific blocks contained in the Washington metro area, the music is also in conversation with the Black experience happening all over the world. It is Mardi Gras and jazz funerals in New Orleans. It's Carnival in Trinidad and its many variations across the globe. It's the samba schools in Brazil, it's Santeria in Cuba, Juju in Nigeria. All around the world, Black music and rituals tell a story of freedom, of life, and of death. So, there are several narratives that run through the whole book. So music, life, and death is of course the main one from the title. So every chapter deals with that in some way, and we're tracing the history of the Chocolate City. So when it became the Chocolate City, right after the in the wake of the civil rights movement in Washington D.C. in particular. When Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, many communities in D.C. were burned during riots. And so what happened was go-go sort of filled those spaces, and they brought them back to life, and they sort of filled the gap between that those riots and it came all the way to this renaissance that's happening right now in the D.C. So the Chocolate City is dead now, and you can see that through the music. You sort of trace the official maybe end, according to the census figure, would be 2010, when the population dipped below, the Black population became the minority population in D.C. But I argue in the book that it actually happened a few years earlier, when the majority of Black homeowners the majority of homeowners stopped being Black around 2005. And there was a major club called Club U, which is right at the corner of 14th and U Street, that it was a go-go that actually took place in a government building, which is one of these things that can only exist in the Chocolate City. And there was a horrible tragedy that happened there. Someone was killed and on the dance floor, and that club was closed down. And so, I sort of traced that. That was like the, I guess the cultural end of the Chocolate City, when that was sort of no longer acceptable. The other sort of thread that goes through the book is looking at go-go as a counter discourse to hip-hop. So, as I said, hip-hop did like this, and go-go has done like this. And when we talk about go-go, because it has remained in the D.C. area for the most part, people always sort of talk about it in terms of it being a failure and why didn't it sort of pass on. And what I really argue in this book is that it's not a failure. It's just it's another way to approach cultural production, keeping it local, keeping the money circulating in the same community. One of the things that go-go and the example of go-go in the Chocolate City offers is a way to see like an alternate path that other Black musical traditions have taken, popular Black musical traditions have taken. So, you know, what if hip hop? What if hip hop was created in the Bronx in New York in the '70s? What if hip hop had? What if the Bronx got to keep hip hop and got to keep all that that money that that industry has generated? You know, or in New Orleans, if New Orleans kept jazz to itself, you know, how would that look? Go-go is sort of one of those things that it allows you to, another frame, another way of looking at everything. And so, you know, ultimately, this is a book that's about movement. So, you know, we're talking about the movement of bodies on the dance floor and the movement of energy that's going back and forth between the band and the audience. You're also looking at the movement of people from the center of the city, you know, that there was, you know, white then black flight, middle class flight from the 1950s all the way to probably around 2000 when that process reversed itself. And, you know, and you're looking at the movement of black people and concentrations of black people. And you're also looking at the movement of ideas, cultural traditions, rituals, and voices. And so what you're, you know, one of the great ironies of the death of the Chocolate City is that as the black population has been dispersed and mostly been pushed out of the center of the city, you have this black president that's moved in. And so, you know, one of the things that George Clinton in his 1975 classic, Chocolate City, he was that was actually a national hit, but that was a tribute to Washington, D.C. and the fact that there was a black mayor there. He also shouts out all the other places during that time that were that had black mayors as well. So it was a celebration. It was a real political song. It was a celebration of black leadership. And in the song, he goes and he sort of wonders, you know, about, well, they still call it the White House, but that's a temporary condition, you know. And so and he, you know, he goes through this whole thing about what if there were a black president, and, you know, who would he put on his cabinet, and all of those things happen. And so just as this Chocolate City itself has died, you know, you really do have this black house, you know, as I guess as George Clinton would say. And so I choose to look at this as the movement of voices from the margins of society into the center. And this is sort of you know, it speaks to global movements and where people of color and where their voices will be heard as well. And so, you know, it's sort of odd that this is happening, and it's kind of, you know, there are many conflicting things to sort of think about in these movements of people and culture in Washington, D.C. And what I'm really asking for readers to do is to kind of grapple with that and think about what does that mean for the future that these movements are happening. So I'm asking you to look at the history and this very rich history of Washington, D.C. and how it's manifested in go-go culture, and, you know, looking at, well, what is the future of urban centers, and many of which are changing throughout the city. So you know, one last thing I'll say before I take questions is that it's what's really encouraging about go-go is just the vitality of it, even though it's been displaced and it's very disrespected, and most people, even the black leadership, don't find very much that's redeeming about the culture. It's sort of there are many sort of class elements to it, and so it's not something that's embraced generally. But the beat just still goes on and on and on, and you can still go and see 800 people. It's nothing to go to a club and see 800 people coming out to a show. And you know, it's also finding new places like online. You know, there's gogoradio.com and tmotgogo.com are two, you know, or just two, and there are many others. But they get millions of hits a month in traffic, and so it's just this incredible gravity-defying life force. And I have gone to it over the last 10 years over and over again, just for kind of inspiration and things to think about. And And so I'm really happy that Go-Go lives and that it goes on, even though the Chocolate City is dead. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd love to get questions, comments. It's actually mostly in Prince George's County, and so there's kind of a fight between DC and PG. Like, DC officials don't want it, and the PG officials, well, we're not taking it either. So Prince George's County is right over the northeast and southeast line. It's just on the eastern end of DC, and it's sort of known like right after, before, it's one of those places that actually got gentrified by black people. And that's, you know, it shows you how that term is very racialized. You know, that means white people going in. But actually, black people went into Prince George's County, black professionals went in, and they raised the education level, raised the income level, and also led to a lot of development that happened there. So that's really like the shadow Chocolate City. You know, they call it the Ninth Ward around DC. And so the last 3 chapters of the book are set there. And, you know, starting in 2000 when I really started covering the scene. So one of the other, I guess, parallels that I make is that the new U Street is Branch Avenue or Route 5. So, you know, it's sort of like a thing you look back on. You're like, wow, well, all the action for Go-Go right now is all along that strip in Prince George's County. And it's also moving further into Charles County as well, because again, like there's, you know, it can be rowdy crowds. It could be tough to control. You know, like it's a lot of energy, and it's a lot to sort of for folks to deal with in these places. So it's sort of like this back and forth. Well, we don't want them, and you can take them. And then, you know, talking about the speed of it, I mean, that's sort of the thing for me too. Like I got there in '94, and it's just like it's completely changed. And the latest census figures that have came out show that they're of the top 10 fastest white, like I think it's like grammatically not right, but the places that got the whitest the fastest, there are 10 area codes. 4 of those are in DC. And so, you know, that sort of speaks to that. Yeah, it is singular in DC. I mean, the gentrification and urban renewal is a, you know, it's definitely like a national movement, but DC is one of those flashpoints for that. So in 1986 was probably when hip hop and go-go were right about here. They were roughly equivalent, like, you know, New York was, they were just roughly equivalent, I guess, is for their respective places. And that was the time when Island Records, which Island Def Jam was one of the main companies that globalized reggae music, and they globalized hip hop music. And they were coming for go-go as well. And they did a big movie. One of the, you know, Bob Marley had just died in the early 80s, and they were looking for another next big thing. And so they tried, but it just didn't work. Like, it just really doesn't translate very well. So I don't know if you were able to go to any of the shows, but it's very difficult to, like, even to listen to a recording, it doesn't translate it. You know, and that's something that I really struggled with even in this book, like to just describe what happens, because it's not something that you can describe. It's not something that you can easily commodify. It's an experience, and it's live, and it's face-to-face, person-to-person. And so that's not something that's easily commercialized. So that's one reason. It's just the nature of what it is. So it's actually a very close cousin to juju music out of Nigeria, and it has the same sort of band structure and the same relation to the community in that capital in Nigeria as well. And the other reason that, you know, some go-go people, you know, a few of them might admit it, is that they didn't want it to go national. You know, one person said that, you know, a lot of people would lose their jobs if it went national, because, you know, you think about with hip hop, you know, your lawyer gets their cut, you know, the accountant gets their cut, the distributor gets a cut. With go-go, it's scaled all the way down, so your distributor is somebody local. In fact, it's rooted in these neighborhood storefronts, you know, where you can buy and sell tapes, and so it's very, like, the whole infrastructure is just there, and the whole economy is there. So people guard it pretty heavily. They say they want to go national, but they don't really. So I think those are a couple of the reasons. Probably there are probably others.
I mean, I was thinking
Yes, yes. I end that chapter in New Orleans at my mother's, her jazz funeral, her second line, because my husband's from New Orleans. So that's also part of the reason when I started hanging out at the Go-Go's, he was like, oh, that's just like the brass bands, because it's the same sort of thing. Like instead of prom, they had their go-go, and the go-go bands would play at prom, and for him growing up in New Orleans, the brass bands would play for prom. Somebody you could touch. It's many, many, many parallels. And actually, I had my biggest event in New Orleans, like so far, which was kind of crazy. And I also had been in touch with David Simon and George Pelicanos, who, the writers for Treme, who are based in DC, and they also really see this connection. But one of the differences is that, I think people know New Orleans is a cultural place and they go there expecting to experience culture and support culture. Not so much in DC. I mean, it sort of is considered this political place, and to the extent that there is a go-go scene, it's sort of in the shadows, not hidden. I mean, it's in plain sight, but say, for instance, the Club U that I mentioned, that this was a club that operated from the 1990s to 2005 in a government building. There was a bureaucracy. There were like multiple bureaucracies during the day. At night, they all went home, and then the go-go people came in. And that happened for years. They had their liquor license, and they went on for years until this murder. And it was a stabbing on the dance floor, and it was terrible. But there was a whole lot of discussion, like, oh my God, why would there be go-go at a government building? Like, how appalling. But, again, it's almost like these alternate realities, and you're sharing the same space, the same air, the same water, but they don't know about the other one. So I actually wrote a piece on The Root about this recently, about the parallels between New Orleans and DC. Right now, New Orleans is in a fight because since the hurricane, I guess policymakers are looking at it as a chance to begin anew, right? So they're rebuilding and rewriting all the rules that govern that city, which was a chocolate city, as Ray Nagin famously said after the hurricane. And what they're cracking down on second line culture, which is very similar to go-go culture. They're requiring licenses and all these things that happen. But there was a big push back when the city tried to crack down on them. In DC, there's not even, like, the police can say whatever they want to say about it with impunity. There's, like, really no one rushing to defend it, because it's sort of, it's sort of seen as working class, blue collar culture, and just they're the people sort of without a voice that are there doing it. So it's still going on, still strong, but kind of in the shadows. But it's real interesting parallels. And so watching Treme is kind of surreal to see that too, watching the whole storyline. The go-go bands that perform in DC, they're calling out. They're in negotiation with the people who are standing in front of them. They're not thinking about how it sells. They're trying to make the bodies move right then in that moment. And so even with Chuck Brown, when he started Go-Go, I interviewed him before he passed away, and he talked about the Maverick Room and how, he had been working on a new sound, and he knew it hit immediately when people started jumping on the tables, and then they got rid of the tables next time, and then they were like, all right, keep it right there, and so he just kept it in that sort of pocket. And so that's all that they're accountable to, and that's it. And so, it's sort of a fickle thing. Wale is an artist who, I'm not sure if you're familiar, he's a hip hop artist who has achieved he's a DC based hip hop artist that has achieved some national success. He sort of towed the line a little bit. He incorporates go-go in what he's doing, but then, he's sort of caught in this middle space where he's on a national label, he's got national release, he's touring nationally. I think he was with Lady Gaga. She was actually on one of his songs. And so he's kind of towing the line where a lot of the Main Street critics are like, well, why do you have those rough sounding go-go artists singing with you? And, but the reality is if he keeps the DC people happy, he will eat for the rest of his career. And, the national group is sort of fickle, and you never know. And, and one of the other, I guess, sort of ironies I say, go-go it's this live sort of concert culture, and in a time when music industry is changing and people don't want to pay for music and they just want to download, like that's sort of where artists are really making their living now. And so, go-go's kind of been out of style so long, it's kind of come back in style to take that like live music approach. So I think there's still, like I said, and to frame that as I don't think it's quite accurate to frame that as a failure. I mean, it's a conscious decision that the community makes to keep it real. I hate that cliche, that hip hop cliche, but to sort of keep it true and keep that live, authentic experience for them. And then and even with the new, there's a new genre go-go called bounce beat, which is kind of interesting because it's like New Orleans they call it bounce, and DC they call it bounce beat. I don't know how these things sort of popped up around, kind of simultaneously. But like the old school go-go people, and it sounds very punk, very, very punk. It's like, it's very driving, it's hardcore. The kids go insane. Like, some of the most amazing feats of athleticism I've ever seen in my life were at these all ages shows for these bounce beat bands. But, the older generation, they don't feel like it's real go-go to them, so there's even like debate within the go-go community about that. But the bounce beat is still, like, that's where you do see the majority of people supporting it now. That's how you'll see it in the schools. That's how you'll see it in, that's where TCB, 1,000 people, on a regular night, which amazes me because it's like, you can see them tomorrow. Like why are you paying that much money to see them tonight? But, and the reality is the money's there. And I think the other thing about that has maybe contributed to the go-go kind of doing like this is the federal government. It's all tied in. Like the federal economy is very healthy, it's very strong, it's very stable, and it's sort of like so that means that there's, like, I guess, comparatively speaking, black people in the DC area have more disposable income at all class levels. They have more disposable income. There's more opportunity to get jobs. And so that also contributed, like they don't necessarily, to stay working as a musician, they don't have to tour outside of DC. And that's something that's even different about New Orleans too. You can go see a show in New Orleans, you were just there, you can see a show in New Orleans for free, $5, $10, easy. That never happens in go-go, So like it's very expensive. Like you really have to pay, and it's just kind of interesting how they're it's a reflection of their respective economies. Yeah, there are definitely those collaborations, and the 930 Club was the old 930 Club was one of those places where go-go acts could perform, and they shared venues with some of the punk acts, and there are so many parallels between punk scenes and the way that their economy works and the way the go-go economy works. But it's still incredibly segregated. Like it is amazingly segregated, and it's just sort of I think a reflection of the institutions that are there in DC. I mean, I came into DC going to Howard University, so that was sort of my entry. And so I've kind of been in this, I guess, alternate black universe since I got to DC, where you can go around, I say in the introduction, you can walk around for days and never encounter a white person. That used to. Now that has changed a lot. But, I think that they're allies, and, the only thing I can say is that, these are segregated communities, and the places where go-go is most popular are the most hardcore segregated places, neighborhoods, schools. If you look by and large, if you mix in charter, public, private schools, all like you're looking at those institutions are incredibly segregated. So it's like that's why it's the social reality as well. Yeah, and I mean, there's a writer in DC named Clinton Yates who I need to have a conversation with him about this, but he disagrees with, he thinks that there's been more white presence in go-go's than I acknowledge in the book. I mean, I'm really looking forward to see the evidence of that, because I've been immersed in it for a long time. I mean, there's some. I mean, not to say that it's totally enforced, but there's some. But even with one exception to the class, because there's also class issues. There's also, really quickly before I'm going to talk about a little bit about the private school scene in DC, the private school go-go scene. So, but one other difference between the punk scenes and the go-go scene, like, I get the sense that they're more of the punk fans age out and they move on. With go-go, it's like a multi-generational thing. I mean, you have people who party with Chuck Brown, partying with people half their age. You have your all-age shows where it's bounce beat, and so it goes, and then you have your grown and sexy shows that sort of target kind of, it's more fancy, happy hour, black professional type of thing. So they're not aging. People kind of like, again, these are like DC natives mostly DC natives who, don't leave. Like they're the sort of people who stay. Now there's also the private school scene. So like I spent some time with Big G from Backyard Bands. I profile him in the book. He was on The Wire, and he's also in Treme. He's legendary DC figure in DC who I profiled when I was at the Washington Post. And when I interviewed him probably about 10 years ago, he told me he remembered partying with Chelsea Clinton at Sidwell Friends because, they would have at Sidwell Friends, like all the elite high school, they all had black student unions. University of Maryland has a black student union. So it could be for Black History Month, it could be for whatever, or for prom, they'll bring in the go-go bands and so that you might have some exposure there when that's happening. Yeah, anybody can do it, and that's sort of like some of the old heads. They don't like the new bounce beat music because it's rough listening because it's you're not seeing a lot of the melodies and so like the early '80s go-go it sounded very sunny and sort of light and kind of fun, kind of like just light. There was more lightness in it, and the bounce beat, like I said, it's rototoms, it's sort of this driving beat, super energetic, really hardcore dancing going on, but it doesn't quite sound the same. And part of that is, I argue, is part of it is, again, in the structures that are around and how they're changing in the neighborhoods. So whereas their previous generations, they actually might have a neighborhood school that everybody goes to. You don't have that as much anymore. They might have a music program. They might have their marching. It also, some of it comes out of the marching band tradition as well that was in high school. And a lot of that's been eradicated. So a lot of the kids that I was interviewing who are in the bounce beat bands and starting up their own bounce beat bands, they're mostly like listening to each other, they're listening to Backyard Band, who are considered like old heads, and they're not even 40 yet, but so it really is sort of a reflection of the social structure. So the music is just totally a reflection. So you're talking about segregated, highly segregated reality. You're talking about not as much organized music instruction. I mean, it really just is, and you're talking about gentrification and change, and so all of that has an impact on the music and how it sounds and what kind of experience it's in the go-go's. Yeah. I mean, go-go's kind of interesting because it's hard to find it like on iTunes, and hard to find it like they're not doing iTunes. Nobody's getting a cut. Like they're keeping all of it right there. And I mean, you can download it. There are places where you can download the music, but they're not going through iTunes. Right before the book went to press, one of my best friends at Go-Go is Go-Go Nico, who's in the chapter, The Archive, and he's one of the unofficial historians of Go-Go, and he's been my friend for many years now. And he, right before the book went out, he was like, well, the Go-Go Collision, we need to talk to you about this book. It's going out through a court. We need to see it before I'm like, it's shipped. It's over. And we need to see it. That's a corporation. I'm like, no, it's Duke University Press. He was like, but that's still I'm like, no. It's nonprofit. It's, it's just for educational purposes. And, so, and then he was like, okay, so that was okay. But yeah, this very, anti-corporate, grassroots. We're keeping all the money, whether it's the person who's designing the flyers, the person designing the T-shirts, the security companies, even the venues. I mean, the venues might be changing all the time, but the people controlling them and the people like mobilizing them, those are the same, and that money is staying right there. So you have people who, that's their job, and that's all they do is, some aspect of go-go music. I don't know. That's a hard question to answer because I haven't gotten that much feedback from within the go-go community. I mean, a lot of people have seen me around for a long time. So you have, I guess, some of the senior figures. I've been friends with them, and you know, I've been writing for a long time about this. So I've been friends with them for a long. I haven't heard any negative, you know, negative feedback. I'm not a hero, you know, I'm not like, they're not thinking that, and this is what I was talking to somebody else I was doing an interview with about, it's like, I'm not a hero, you know, like they're not like for discovering, and some of it is like, well, you know, maybe not understanding why, you know, what is the purpose. And, you know, for me, I really look at like go-go itself is about recognition, and it's about recognizing the people who are in the room. It's, you know, it's about celebrating those who have died, because that's a big, huge thing, is the RIP shout. Like you can get an RIP shout out 10 years after you're dead, you know, which you can see in the book. Like it's amazing. Like it's a documentation. In that live moment, they're documenting people who aren't typically documented in mainstream history or journalism or anything else. And so because of that, you know, I think it's important, and I've been along this path all along because I think it's important. And also I think as a meta level, like, you know, if you get into the you know, thing about academic work is that you know that these ideas and these stories and these people will be in conversation with scholars for generations from now. And all the tapes will fade, you know, the vinyl will go, you know, all those things those physical things will go. But, you know, when you know, make an attempt, you know, as flawed as my attempt might have been, you make an attempt to put it into words, it kind of guarantees it even more of an immortality, you know, for people and a time which was really compelling, time in American history that was really compelling. Well, if there's a message, it's let's party, because it's party. Go-go is party music. I mean, that's it. I mean, you know, this intellectuals come in and find meanings and layers and stuff, but you go in there to have fun and to party and to dance and to, you know, also to celebrate. And so the majority, if you were to do a content analysis of go-go music and go-go lyrics, a lot of it would be, a high number of it would be shout out. Oh, we've got Joe in the house from Gaithersburg, you know, good to see you. Oh, we got the Sweet Honeys, you know, or whatever crew, you know. Oh, 56th Street, you know, is in the house. Oh, there's the bartender out back. Make sure you take care of her. Claire's, you know, she's doing the drinks. Make sure you take care of her. So that's most of the stuff that you're going to hear. And also, like a high number of them, so they're acknowledging the people that are there, but then a high number is the people who have passed on. So for a time when bodies were dropping in DC like flies, I mean, DC was the murder capital. You know, I had somebody call in when I was on Point Radio. There was a listener who was from DC. Actually, it was based in this area. She called in and she was just like, you know, during those times, if you got a shout out from Chuck Brown, it was almost like therapeutic, you know, to sort of hear it and to be acknowledged and just to be acknowledged. I mean, it's kind of a very straightforward thing, to be acknowledged. I exist, I was here, you know, so the music is sort of a celebration of that, whether they've gone already into the next life or whether they're standing there right there. It's always, let's celebrate, let's remember. They're also like, the go-go scene is obsessively recorded, and so that's one of the things that, that I talk about in the book too. So Nico has about 5,000 live recordings in his collection of like, these are distinct live recordings at go-go's. And, you know, usually they'll put them out like as PA tapes. So you can go to little PA, they call them PA tapes for public address, but they're PA tapes. And people don't buy them to say, oh, you know, like this is like a canonic recording that, you know, that was a great show. No, they buy it sort of like as a way to remember the show. And if you got that shout out, especially, you want to, you know, you definitely want to get that recording of it. In every go-go, there's like a Polaroid, they call the Polaroid corner. So there's a photographer there and like some sort of backdrop that's, you know, so you remember that. Yeah, you got the booth there, and you know, you go there with your friends and you get your picture. You know, maybe it's like, you know, airbrush pictures of Dom Perignon, champagne, or whatever they're behind you. And so it's constantly recording. And when somebody who, and it's sort of like the idea that life is very precious and very fleeting, and so, you know, you get that picture there from prom, and this happened. You know, I was writing an article for the Post about this kid who he was 15 and he was killed, and as soon as he died, all his friends went to the local T-shirt shop, where the owner of the T-shirt shop had his picture already, you know, from when they were at prom or various go-go's that he'd gone to. They all pressed out the, you know, a version of the T-shirt with his picture, you know, R.I.P. Hot Rod, 1982 to 19 blah blah blah, you know. So that's, it's a record. It's a way of celebrating and remembering when. You know, and in that case, that kid, when I called the police about it, they had lost his the police report, like they couldn't locate it. You know, so there wasn't an official record of him there, but there was one at, you know, within the economy of go-go. This photo was done by Thomas Sayers Ellis, who is a noted poet, very distinguished poet, also a hardcore go-go head. He's somebody who go-go has been his muse like for his whole life. He was in the Petworth band, and so he teaches poetry, I think, at Sarah Lawrence, but he also is, again, one of these obsessive chroniclers of go-go, so he's always taking pictures. This is a kid named Niall. He's holding a Chuck Brown bobblehead doll, and I like this, you know, as opposed to, like, of course, there are many amazing, like, ecstasy, ecstatic go-go photos of people just having a great time, but I like this one because it just made me think about the future, and you don't know what his future is, and you don't know what the future of the Chocolate City or the future of go-go is, and he's there. And so actually at a book signing in DC at Busboys and Poets, this kid who's about, I think he's about 6 now, so it looks like an old picture, but it was fairly recent. He came and he was signing books with me. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you.